Sometimes I wonder if I should, you know, maybe try a different class, but then I thought, no! I just love Sorceress so much, okay? Hello, my fellow sorcerers, and those of you that are indeed still sorcerers. Not that I blame anyone for spirit bonding, it's really fun, it's the new class, and it's, you know, literally dominating everything, but I cannot bring myself to do it. I feel duty bound to always push Sorcerer as far as it can go every season, and I always will for you guys. It means a lot how much so many of you seem to enjoy the builds themselves, but also the actual explanation of the why it all works, which I think is equally as important. I get lots of messages being like, oh, I actually understand the actual functionality of this now. I get lots of messages along the lines of, look, it's cool getting the build, but I actually get how it functions now, so I can make my own changes, and that's, you know, that really is cool. But what else is cool when it comes to Sorcerer builds this season is, well, all of them. Of course, we ignore Spiritborn. We're in a really good place, at least in terms of power. We have about 3-ish builds, and then a lot of varieties within that are all really dominant, fun, and fast at everything you kind of actually need to do to Torment 4. Farm everything there is to farm, and do high enough pits to get all your glyphs to level 100, and then all that's left is pit pushing for the sake of it, which is fine, I guess, not really for me. So that's exciting. The less exciting things before we get into what is our 5 best builds of the season, at least so far, is that the class itself still has a few little niggles. Now, I want to do a proper discussion on the state of Sorcerer, and, you know, the time for that is not now, but just as a TLDR, while we have a lot going for us, we still have this kind of awkward pigeonhole situation where we need to use Burning and Devouring Blaze, we need to stack as many Conjuration Mastery stacks as possible, we have to use all of the defensive skills on our bars, we have to use Ice Blades and Lightning Spear, Splintering Energy is still quite prominent, though much better than it was in Season 5, as fun as that was. The whole enchantment system itself is in need of a serious overhaul because 90% of them are too weak, and then of the ones that remain, we have to use essentially the same ones in every build because they're just needed to do any kind of competitive damage. We only have like 2 aspects that we can put into every build because we need to use a certain amount of uniques. Our rings are always going to be Starless Skies and Telrasher unless something major changes, and generally, fundamentally, it comes down to every build, essentially, no matter what kind of skill or aspect you're focusing on, is looking very similar, like 90% the same, even down to your paragon and glyph choices more than ever. So I do think Sorcerer is in need of a variety refresher in terms of how things are built, even if currently our power level, ignoring Spiritborn, but relative to the other normal classes, is pretty damn good, and we do have a plethora of very equally competitive builds that are all really entertaining to play. So, before I get too lost in the sauce on that, as I could talk Sorcerer, its mechanics, and what we need for days, let's get into this with number 5. And this one is kind of awkward because essentially this is the one spot on the list dedicated to the least bad of the bad builds, and I'm going to give it to Ice Spikes Blizzard because, hey, I've always adored this setup, and it's something I've always wanted to bring you guys in every season, but notably I've not brought it to you yet this season because it's kind of in a sorry state. It's sort of as good as like Charge Bolts or Flame Weaver Firebolt, Firewall, and, you know, builds along those lines at the moment. Which is to say, just kind of fine, right? It can do all your Torment 4 content, but if you want it to really shine and start, you know, pushing on the door of our real top options, you have to, and I mean have to, get a blue rose with a GA chance for Ice Spikes to explode twice, and you have to triple Masterwork hit it so that it goes to nearly 100%. You have to have a chance for Ice Spike to deal double damage temper on your staff at the max roll, and you have to masterwork it 3 times so you get to nearly 100%. Then you have a 100% chance for your ice spikes to do double damage and then double damage again because they're hitting twice. At that point, you can push Blizzard to about like a pit 100. But of course, that's a monstrous requirement to then still not be better than better builds, which is really anticlimactic. Ice spikes is almost there, but it's definitely not as strong as it's been in previous seasons where it's had claim to just the best build, especially in certain content, and was always a phenomenal lair boss killer because you could stack up the blizzards before they even spawned, whereas now it's a lot more sad in that regard. But undeniably being able to do if you got a peak version with peak gear min-maxed up to a pit 100 does give it claim to a comfy 5th spot on this list, but I am loath to recommend it any further. I really did start putting together a Blizzard build for you guys. I got that 4GA Blue Rose, was masterworking it, took it for a spin, and I was like, this just feels just not quite it, and I'd almost feel bad recommending it. If I do eventually manage to get the proper masterworking hits, I might well be back with it, but as it currently stands, yeah, Blizzard in 5th. Which brings us to number 4, which is your Frozen Orb builds. Either with a wand and focus, or with a staff, splintering energy on said staff, throwing out your Frozen Orbs, and then consequently spawning all of your conjurations, of which lightning spears will be the majority, and then splintering energy will go big boom. The Frozen Orbs themselves, flying everywhere, doing a really comfortable damage in of themselves, is really nice, and this is just kind of your standard good build, right? Easy to slip into once you get your Winter Glass. The mana kind of solves itself because of Conjuration Mastery and now Enlightenment, and it just gets the job done. It's probably the build, or at least the second best build, to just instantly dominate in Torment 4. It can push past pit 100, and really there's just nothing wrong with it. It's fun, it's solid, and it's nice to be able to, you know, play with Frozen Orb. Of course, it then uses splintering energy, so the damage is mostly coming from that aspect and lightning spears, so the fact that you're playing Frozen Orb is a little bit lame because that takes a little bit of a back seat, but ever since lightning spear got capped at 12 and the changes to splintering energy, the Frozen Orb feels a much more hefty part of it, not just kind of an incidental to get the engine going, which certainly does help. And above everything, yeah, it's just strong, it's powerful, and it's fun, but in my opinion, not as powerful or fun as those we're about to get onto. So, what are they? In your 3rd place then is your pure lightning splintering energy builds. The 2 best ones being Arclash and Ball Lightning. Ball Lightning is actually something I've been tinkering with at the moment, and if it really pops off then I will be bringing you it, and it's kind of a Ball Lightning modification of the Arclash build I did bring you last week, which I'm still really proud of. The point is, you have unstable currents permanently active, you have a lot of attack speed going on, you're pumping out shock skills, which means you're pumping out lightning spears, and then they're pumping out damage. Full critical strike damage, always of course, in nearly every sorcerer build, and then you see the big numbers. You will see billions from the splintering energy hits, and because Arclash in that one is a basic skill, you can get 100% extra attack speed from Bucket 2, and then you couple it with overwhelming energy, so you're pumping out even more random shock skills, and you can reach and do reach the 24 cap Conjuration Mastery, ignoring the Hydras, adding an extra potential 3, which means you're getting 24 stacks of Conjuration Mastery, which means if you have a good GA Amulet roll of it, you can start getting into like the 250 times multiplicative increase of damage you're pumping out, which is awesome. We also now get into the realms of using Teleport Enchant instead of it on your bar, because Unstable Currents only pumps out Fire Familiars, which act as your burning for Devouring Blaze and such, so we can just fly around the room with attacks reduce, evade cooldown boots, and the Teleport Enchant, which feels great. and this kind of speed is what really takes it above your Frozen Orb versions for me. So whether you do it more traditionally with a Ball Lightning, and then the Ball Lightning is a bigger part of the damage, or you tinker with my Arclash setup, where you use the fact it's Arclash to always have out the maximum 12 Lightning Spears and then some, but they are the majority of the damage, it very much plays similarly, and in that way is super strong, super quick, and really cannot get stopped by any Torment 4 content. It does, however, struggle a little bit when it comes to boss damage, which then leads us into our second place. That being Chain Lightning. And this really makes me happy because I love Chain Lightning with Axial Conduit, but I love it even more with Frostburn and azurewrath. Going this lucky hit route, but without sacrificing any of the critical loveliness that makes the splintering energy you just slap on still sing, means that you're constantly hitting massive amounts of damage with the Axial Conduit explosion, the splintering energy explosion, the fire and cold damage from Frostburn popping off, the frost damage from azurewrath popping off, and everything is just getting disintegrated. If I had to choose a single build to just existing for the rest of the season, it would be this one. It's got that perfect blend of power and speed that I really adore, on top of the spam teleporting enchant as well, and it's incredibly tanky, especially now with Shroud of False Death. Having infinite mana without your Andariels and your Starlight is really nice too, and it also does shred Torment 4 bosses, which is what you really need. Killing things like Duriel before he can burrow being a good little metric for that. It doesn't do as much top end damage as what number 1 is going to be, but it also doesn't need to, because it does enough damage to do everything other than seriously push the pit, which again is kind of optional content that you don't really ever need to do, because it can plenty much push past pit 100 and get your glyphs to level 100 in a fairly comfortable manner. It just works beautifully, and the harmony and synergy between all the items is really nice. Crit damage, lucky hit, lots of damage procs, and lots of explosions of all 3 elements everywhere. It's honestly one of the most sorcerer builds you could want, and I'm really happy with it. Then we get to number 1, which I can't believe I'm going to say this, but yeah, Fireball is technically the reigning champion this season. It has the highest damage potential, and that's because Destructive Fireball, that skill node, is bugged. It is compounding in each of the bounces from Gloves of the Illuminator, resulting in billions upon billions of damage. With a perfectly built one, you can push into the 10 billion plus range, which is obviously ludicrous. You will delete Torment 4 lair bosses as soon as they pop up, and in something like Horde, you just kind of stand there and vaguely gesture around the place, and the fireballs will bounce to the edges of the room, killing everything, and you kind of just don't need to leave the center, which is really amusing. It's not quite as fast at speed farming anything that isn't hordes, like if you're doing your Undercity, your Nightmare Dungeons, your pits, then Chain Lightning is going to beat it, simply because of how Fireball mechanically works, because of the bouncing. In corridors, in tight spaces, the bounces either don't go where you want them to, they get eaten by terrain, you just don't have the damage because the bounces aren't happening enough, and essentially, unless you deliberately keep restarting the pit until you get a very open map, you just can't pit push. The raw damage of Fireball is capable of going up to our highest pit clear, but the reality is actually making that happen is going to really test your patience, because you need the perfect map. But in any other content, it really is special. It did suffer from being too squishy, but now that Shroud of False Death is back, you can just whack that on, gain a load of extra health, and that problem solves itself too. So in terms of I want to see the biggest numbers on my screen, yeah, Fireball wins for Sorcerer this season, but if you're going to judge it as just practically actually in the game, how does it feel to play, I would put it even with Chain Lightning. And of course I can't talk about Fireball without mentioning the variant that is pit pushing, which involves using Shatter to fish for the correct setup in order to really compound the damage, and that does hold our pit pushing record of the season, like 106 or so, which is really nice. But Shatter Fireball doesn't really work well in essentially any other content, and and really struggles, ironically, with boss damage unless you take the destructive node, but then you're failing in the actual intention of the build, so there is that too. But in any case, Fireball, whether it's regular or pit-pushing Shatter, does take the crown for those big, juicy billions appearing. So, with that all said then, that's where we're at currently. And yes, a lot of these builds still revolve around splintering energy, Fireball being a big breath of fresh air, but I really hope that next season we get a proper shake-up and can start maybe not having Lightning Spear, Ice Blade, Ice Armor, and a Flame Shield with the same items on every build, with the same aspects on every build, and, you know, just something. That really is why Fireball and then Chain Lightning with, like, Frostburn has been a real refreshing thing to see, and hopefully that direction gets pushed. For now though, let me know what you're playing, what your favourite is. You can check all of these builds out linked down below in detail, and until next time, like you've enjoyed this, subscribe, hit the bell for more, consider supporting the future of the channel on Patreon down below, and until we meet again, a goodbye.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.